Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. We have to ask, how bad is Scotland's NHS? We know it is pretty bad, and of course at the moment you've got a health minister who's not even capable of doing his job. But it's looking like it's about to get a whole lot worse. As in, it will be the end of the NHS in Scotland. It's going to go to a fully private scheme, or at least a partially private scheme. You may get accident emergency for free, but it looks like anything elective, you'll have to start paying. And this is because the NHS has been destroyed under the SNP. This isn't Westminster. This is purely a devolved issue. And yet all the money that could have saved it has been spent elsewhere, on things like brochures and foreign embassies. And so when the NHS finally ends in Scotland, you'll know exactly who to point the finger of blame at. And it won't be the Westminster government. It will be the SNP themselves. It will be the likes of Sturgeon and Humza Yousaf who have done this. We'll have a look at this article and see how bad it is and how bad it is going to get. And it will be the end of everything you know. Who knows, it may even get better. Here goes. So, time to pay for healthcare. NHS Scotland's former chief says the current system is no longer sustainable. And it's not surprising when you're cutting the budget year after year after year and refusing to pay for all the things that absolutely need to be paid for. What the hell do you expect? Meanwhile, people in Scotland do have very shiny brochures they can use. Maybe they can roll them round and use them as a splint if you break your arm. It's got to be quicker and easier than going to hospital, where you're going to die while waiting in a 12-hour accident and emergency waiting room. Professor Paul Gray said it was time to have a mature conversation about the role of the private sector can play in the health service as SNP failures leave the system on its knees. They have a terrible trouble actually hiring people. They have an awful trouble retaining them. And it seems that there are so many problems. And if only you had a health secretary who's got his mind on the game, really taking care of business instead of, worrying about other issues, then perhaps it wouldn't be in such a bad state. Unfortunately, you've got Michael Matheson. That's not good. Anyway, Scots may need to reconcile themselves to having to pay for medical treatment at the point of need, according to the former Chief Executive of NHS Scotland, Professor Paul Gray. He said the current system was not sustainable and discussions should have started 5 years ago on how the service moves forward. Of course, 5 years ago, still under the NHS rule. There's no getting away with it. They've had 17 years of this now. It comes ahead of Tuesday's publication of new waiting list statistics, which are expected to make grim reading. Why not? They have every Tuesday for months now. They constantly make terrible, terrible reading. It is getting worse and worse. And as we move more into winter, it's not likely to get better, is it? The SNP government has failed to get a grip with the crisis engulfing the NHS, with Humza Yousaf passing the baton to Michael Matheson in March, and indeed in doing so, passing the buck. Remember, a lot of this is actually down to Humza Yousaf and his inability to do the job before he passed it on to Michael Matheson and his inability to do the job. In fact, one only has to look back 5 years or so. It's just been one useless person after another. Nobody has bothered doing their job at health. Speaking to BBC Scotland, Professor Gray said the NHS Scotland was not sustainable in its current form, and he called for a debate on the future. Although he was not suggesting any particular development, he said policymakers may need to consider making patients pay for certain procedures. He said what we can't afford is just to carry on as we are and hope for the best. The consequence is that everything slowly gets worse. And why not? It's been getting slowly worse for 17 years. It's only now, it's about to cliff edge. It's going to go and down big time. Because look, you got him in charge. The pressure on staff continues to grow. The service that patients and their families receive, despite the best efforts of everyone, continues to reduce. It comes as a growing number of people opt to pay for treatment rather than wait on the NHS. Professor Gray said a mature conversation about the role of the private sector was needed. Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's going to have to be, isn't it? Because there's no way that the NHS in Scotland can continue after the years of underfunding, continual underfunding. He said there are certain things even within the overall provision of healthcare and services that people do pay for. So, example, some cases you do pay for your dentistry. He says people choose to pay for some elements of care they receive. That choice is already open to them. So I think it's about having the conversation. I will point at this way. I will say at this point. If you are in any kind of, let's say you're on the NHS, for example, and you're receiving health, say cancer care, but you also have private health insurance, and you go and say to your private health insurer, look, I understand that there is a new magic drug available. Can we try that? So they will take over your care, but at that point, the NHS will stop caring for you. You can't upgrade your NHS care. You get whatever the NHS care is, you're not allowed to upgrade it and remain in the NHS, which I think is absolutely appalling. Surely, if you're in the NHS and you're taking this, oh, well, look, we've got this other stuff, take it. Take it within the NHS. Upgrade your NHS. Because if you can upgrade and get out of the NHS a little bit quicker, that's going to save the NHS a lot of money. And if you're getting your private treatment, that's treatment you're not getting from the NHS. That's saving money. But the rules are there, and it's a very weird set of rules. Anyway, he carried on. This is Professor Gray. He said, I don't have a view about what the conclusion of the conversation should be because we haven't had it yet. So my view is that we should have it. And by that he means the conversation. He says, if we decide that actually the way we do it is the best way of all choices we could make, that's okay. We've had the conversation. And if on the other hand we decide there's more space for the private sector, perhaps they could do more, then that's good. That's fine too. Asked how urgent the situation was, he said, it would be good if we'd started 5 years ago. Which goes to show you how urgent it is. How urgent is it? Oh, should have done it 5 years ago. It's not going to be solved anytime soon, is it? He said some things do need to get acute before we decide to do something about that. I think it's acute now. He says, I may be forgiven of using that word. I think it's only going to get worse. Oh, of course it's going to get worse. It's going to get continually worse while you got Matheson there. He says, I also think and here detect a genuine will to have the conversation. He says, on balance, my perspective is one of hope, not one of not out of the sphere. So basically, you know, with this idiot in charge, it's getting worse. You're going to have to deal sometimes with some form of privacy, private Medicare involved in order to build and get some things done. But that's only because you can't employ anyone as a health minister who knows what they're doing, or has indeed got their mind on the job. He hasn't. He's got his mind on his iPad and the contents of it and the hope that nothing on there ever comes out. But hey ho, you get what you vote for. That's what it is. Anyway, I shall stop there, come up, and we shall round off the video. Here goes. Now, I get what he's saying. You're already paying for things like dentistry, or some people will pay for optics and things if you go and get glasses and whatever. So I can see that there may be things that you could squeeze across and over, but that's not. So if you're paying extra like that, then surely you must have a reduction in your income tax, or at least in your national insurance, because you can't have it both ways. You can't have paying the same amount of money for a smaller service. That's not how it works. So it's going to be a difficult one to square the circle on that. I do think, however, that it would be possible for the NHS to pay directly to the private sector to get some people off the waiting list. Anyone who's been on a waiting list for more than, say, 12 months, they can go and get their operation, whatever they need, or their consultation, at the very least, done privately but paid for by the NHS. At least that gets them off the list. Looks better if nothing else. And yet the thing is, if you close down all those embassies, for example, if you stop wasting money on brochures, if you got rid of all the people working on independence, if you got rid of the private eyes of the spin doctors and all that, you'd actually have enough money that you could put in a load more doctors and nurses. And that way, life would just be better for everyone. Surely. Am I the only one who can see that? Who knows? Anyway, thank you very much for watching. We'll round off there. We're getting towards the end. I've only got a few more to do, I think. But it's been a long day. I started early today, you see, because dog woke me up, and that was it. I was wide awake club. Thought, I might as well get up and do it. Anyway, we'll finish there. Thank you very much for watching. I will speak to you later because there's a little bit more to do. But anyway, goodbye.